The first thing Xavier noticed was the little boy's laugh. He was sitting in the waiting area of Elmwood Pediatric Associates, flipping through emails he had no intention of reading, when the side door swung open and a woman in scrubs walked into the lobby. The boy, maybe 5 or 6 years old, round-faced, wearing a backpack shaped like a rocket ship, broke free from the older woman holding his hand and ran straight toward her. "Mom!" The woman caught him mid-air, spinning once before pulling him in tight. Xavier looked up from his phone. There was something about the boy's smile that stopped him completely. The way it pulled higher on the left side, the slight gap between his front teeth, the shape of his eyebrows, arched at a particular angle that Xavier had seen in photographs of himself at that age. The woman was still holding the boy when she turned slightly, and Xavier saw her face for the first time in 6 years. Layla. He stood before he'd made the decision to stand. She hadn't noticed him yet. She was whispering something against the top of the boy's head, laughing quietly at whatever he'd just told her. The older woman beside them, Layla's mother, Audrey, Xavier remembered, reached over and tugged the boy's backpack strap straight, then looked up. Her eyes found Xavier immediately. The smile on her face didn't disappear, but it changed. Layla looked up a half-second later. For a moment, none of them moved. "How old is he?" The question came out before Xavier could stop it. He crossed the lobby slowly, his eyes still on the boy. "Layla, how old is he?" Layla's hand tightened on the child's shoulder. "He's a family friend's son," she said. Her voice was even. "Practiced, almost. We were just heading out." But the boy looked up at Xavier with the open curiosity of a child who hadn't yet learned when to stay quiet. "I'm Noah," he said. "I'm 6. Who are you?" Xavier crouched down until he was at eye level with him. Up close, it was undeniable. The slope of Noah's nose. The particular way his head tilted slightly to the left when he was looking at something he didn't understand. Xavier had been told all his life that he did the same thing. "Noah," Layla said quietly, reaching for his hand. "Come on, baby." Xavier stood back up. He looked at Layla. She didn't look away. "Tell me he isn't mine," he said, low enough that only she could hear it. The lobby noise continued around them, a television mounted in the corner, a toddler somewhere behind him fussing, the front desk phone ringing. But between Xavier and Layla, the silence was its own answer. They had met at a hospital charity gala 7 years ago. Xavier had been seated at the same table as the event coordinator, and Layla had been one of 3 physicians honored that evening for a pediatric research grant her clinic had helped fund. She'd given a short speech that was precise and unsentimental, exactly 2.5 minutes long, and returned to her seat without acknowledging the applause. He'd said, "That was the shortest acceptance speech I've ever heard at one of these things." She'd said, "Most people don't actually want to sit through them." He'd laughed before he could help it. Layla was 32 at the time. She'd spent 9 years in medicine, and 2 years before that in the brutal machinery of residency. She was not the kind of person who was easily impressed, and she said so plainly, without apology. Xavier, who had spent most of his adult life being the most important person in any room he entered simply by virtue of his last name, found her indifference to that fact genuinely startling. The Fairbridge family had built their wealth across 3 generations of real estate development. Xavier was the only son, and his father Spencer had made no secret of what that meant in terms of expectations. Xavier would run the company one day. Xavier would marry well. Xavier would consolidate what his grandfather had started. What Spencer had not accounted for was that his son would fall for a pediatrician who worked 60-hour weeks, drove an 8-year-old car, and had no interest in attending charity functions where people bid on art they didn't understand to impress people they didn't like. For almost a year, Layla and Xavier were careful with each other, in the way people are careful when they sense something could break. He learned which things she kept close: her patience, her mother Audrey, the memory of her father who had died when she was 19. And she learned the thing he found hardest to say out loud, that he was afraid of disappointing people who had never once asked him what he actually wanted. They argued, sometimes. Xavier had a tendency to decide things and announce them, the way a man raised to be in charge often does. Layla had a tendency to push back with the calm precision of someone who had spent years having difficult conversations with frightened parents and never once lost her footing. Their disagreements rarely ended in slammed doors. They ended in long silences, and then in the slow, careful work of finding their way back to each other. For a while, that work felt like enough. The phone call she overheard happened on a Wednesday afternoon in March. Xavier was in the kitchen of her apartment, and she had come back early from the pharmacy down the street. She heard his voice through the partly open window. "I understand, Dad." A pause. "I know what the timeline looks like. I'm not saying no." Another pause longer. "I said I'll think about it. That's not the same thing as refusing." She stood outside the door for another 30 seconds, long enough to hear Spencer's voice on the other end, faint and indistinct but unmistakably firm. Long enough to hear Xavier say, "Yes. Okay, yes." Layla went back downstairs and sat in her car for 20 minutes before going back up. She had known, abstractly, that Spencer had someone in mind for Xavier. A woman named Inez Caldwell, whose family ran a development firm the Fairbridges had been trying to partner with for years. She had known about it the way one knows about a weather forecast for a city you're not planning to visit. Possible, distant, not yet relevant. That Wednesday in March, it became relevant. Layla ended things 4 days later. She told Xavier only that she didn't think they wanted the same future, and that she thought they should stop before it became harder to stop. He tried to argue. She didn't change her mind. She was 32 years old, and she had spent the last year being careful with something she now understood could not be protected by care alone. She did not know she was pregnant until 5 weeks later. The test came back positive on a Tuesday morning, in the bathroom of the clinic before her first appointment. She sat on the closed lid of the toilet for a long time, thinking about the Fairbridge name, about the way Spencer had spoken to her, exactly once, at a dinner that was supposed to be casual. The questions about her family background, her income, her 5-year plans, delivered in the pleasant tone of someone who had already made up his mind and was simply conducting the formality of asking. About the fact that Xavier, who loved her in a way she believed was real, had still said yes on that phone call. She thought about Audrey, who was 64, and had raised Layla alone after Layla's father died, and had never once asked Layla to be anything other than exactly who she was. Then, she made her decision. She told Xavier the next week. They met at a coffee shop near the clinic because she did not want to have this conversation in a place that felt intimate. He went very still. He said the right things, that he was surprised, that he needed time to think, that this was a lot to process. He asked the question she'd been bracing for, the one that felt like a door swinging shut. "Were you being careful?" She said yes. "Were you?" He had the grace to look ashamed. She told him she planned to keep the baby. He said he needed a few days. She drove home alone, sat at her kitchen table, and wrote down every possible version of what the next 6 years might look like. Spencer Fairbridge called her 3 days later. She didn't know how he'd gotten her number. He didn't waste time. He said that if the child was a Fairbridge, it belonged with the Fairbridge family. He said there were ways to make a contested custody situation very complicated for a single woman whose professional reputation depended on a stable public image. He said all of this pleasantly, the way a man speaks when he knows he doesn't have to raise his voice to be understood. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "Thank you for calling," and ended the call. That evening, Xavier showed up at her apartment. He was wearing the expression of a man who had had a difficult week and was hoping for resolution. He said he'd talked to his parents. He said they needed more time, but he believed they'd come around. He said he wanted to do the right thing by her and the baby. She looked at him for a long moment. "Your father called me," she said. Xavier blinked. "What?" She told him what Spencer had said. She watched his face move through several expressions in quick succession. Disbelief, then something that might have been anger, then the thing she had most been afraid to see. The careful, diplomatic neutrality of a man trying to manage a situation rather than respond to it. "He shouldn't have said that," Xavier said. "I'll talk to him." "I know you will," she said. "And then he'll tell you something else, and you'll talk to him again." Xavier looked at her. "Layla." "The baby is gone," she said. The room went quiet. "I lost it," she said, "last week." Her voice didn't shake. She had rehearsed this moment for 2 days and she was very good at saying hard things in a steady voice. "I'm sorry, I didn't know how to tell you." He didn't speak for a long time. When he finally did, his voice was rough in a way she hadn't expected. "Why didn't you call me?" "I needed some time." He left an hour later. He called twice more over the following week. She let both go to voicemail. He texted once a month after that to say he hoped she was okay. She didn't respond. She moved into a 2-bedroom apartment closer to Audrey's house before she was showing. She switched to administrative work and telehealth appointments until Noah arrived, 7 weeks early, on a February night. And the first thing she did when the nurse placed him in her arms was count his fingers. 6 years later, she was still counting things. His allergies, the books on his shelf, the exact number of minutes between the clinic and his school. I need to know, Xavier said outside in the clinic parking lot, while Audrey waited with Noah just inside the glass doors. Layla, tell me. She looked at the pavement, then she looked at him. Yes, she said. He's yours. Xavier turned away, one hand pressing flat against the side of a parked car. He stood like that for almost a full minute. When he turned back, his face was different. The composure he normally wore like a second. Skin was still there, but underneath it was something she hadn't prepared herself for. Genuine pain. You told me you lost him. I know. For 6 years I thought my child was dead. She didn't defend herself. There wasn't a defense. There was only the particular calculus of a woman who had stood in a kitchen listening to a man say yes to a future that didn't include her, and then listened to his father explain what would happen to her if she tried to hold on to anything at all. Your father called me, she said, the same week you came to see me. He told me that if the baby was a Fairbridge, it would be raised by Fairbridges. He told me I could be made to look unstable in a custody proceeding. He told me a single woman with a demanding career would not come out of that process in a way I'd like. She kept her voice level. I was 8 weeks pregnant. I had no money saved. Your family has attorneys on retainer. Xavier stared at her. Did you know, she asked, what he said to me? Did you know he called? The answer was on his face before he spoke it. He hadn't known. I'm not saying it was the right choice, she said. I know it wasn't. But I want you to understand why I made it. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Can I meet him? Xavier finally asked, properly. She told Noah the truth on a Sunday morning while they were making pancakes. She turned off the burner, sat down at the kitchen table, and used the plainest words she could find. Noah listened without interrupting, which was unusual for him. When she finished, he looked at the bowl of batter in silence. Is he the man from the clinic? He finally asked. Yes. Why didn't you tell him about me before? Because I was afraid of his family, she said. And I made a mistake. Noah looked at his hands. Is he mad at you? A little. Is he mad at me? No, she said it without hesitation. None of this is your fault, not one part of it. Noah nodded slowly, the way he did when processing something large. Then he said, does he know I'm allergic to peanuts? She almost laughed. He will, she said. I'll make sure of it. The early visits happened in neutral spaces. A park, a children's museum, a bookstore, where Noah spent 45 minutes in the science sections, while Xavier stood nearby holding a book about deep-sea currents he'd picked up to look interested in and then actually became interested in. Layla watched from a nearby bench, close enough to intervene, far enough to give them room. Noah was cautious but not cold. He asked Xavier direct questions. What do you do at work? Do you like it? Why? And evaluated the answers with a seriousness that seemed to unsettle and amuse Xavier in equal measure. One afternoon, Noah showed Xavier a card trick he'd been practicing. Xavier watched the trick fail 3 times in a row. You're doing it with your right hand, Noah told him, with the patience of someone explaining something for the last time. You have to use your left. I'm right-handed. So am I, Noah said without sympathy. You still have to use your left. Layla turned her face toward the window. By the 4th week, Xavier had learned that Noah was allergic to peanuts, shellfish, and one specific brand of orange-scented soap. That Noah liked marine biology and hated the sound of printers. That Noah had not yet said the word dad, and that this was something Xavier would have to earn at whatever pace Noah set, which was the only pace that mattered. Then the call from Spencer came. Xavier had promised to have Noah home by 6. Layla had confirmed the route to the science center, the time they'd leave, the backup plan if parking was bad. She had checked the allergy kit in Noah's backpack twice and written the instructions on a card inside. At 5:40, Xavier called. We're going to be a little late, he said. How late? A pause. My father wants to meet him. It'll only be an hour, and then I'll bring him straight home. Xavier, she kept her voice flat, you promised me. 15 minutes from where we are. We go, we stay briefly, I bring him back. Nothing happens. We had an agreement, not the estate, not without me there. He's my son, Xavier said, and there was an edge in it she recognized. The familiar sound of a man who had been told no and had not yet decided whether to accept it. He has a right to know his family. Bring him home, she said. Xavier, right now. He didn't answer. The call ended. She was already getting her keys. The Fairbridge estate was 40 minutes away. She made it in 32. The gate was closed. The intercom buzzed once and went silent. Light came through the iron bars, long and pale across the driveway. She pressed the intercom again. No answer. She called Xavier. No answer. On the third call, he picked up. She could hear Noah's voice somewhere in the background, small and fraying at the edges. "I want to go home," he was saying. "I want to go home." "Where is he?" she said. "He's fine. He's just..." "Put him on the phone." Silence. Then Noah's voice, very close to the speaker, thin and wavering. "Mom? I'm outside, baby. I'm right here outside the gate. I can't see you." "I know. I'm working on it. You okay?" "I want to come home." His voice broke at the end of that sentence, and something in Layla's chest pulled so tight she had to breathe around it. "I know, sweetheart. I hear you. I'm right here." The line cut out. She put both hands flat against the iron bars. Nothing moved. She had been standing there for 40 minutes, calling Xavier, calling the estate's main line, calling the Fairbridge Company's public emergency number, when the gate began slowly to open. It wasn't Xavier who had opened it. Inez Caldwell Fairbridge came down the front steps with her coat half on, walking fast. She was 38, composed in the way of someone who had spent years managing problems that other people created, and the expression on her face as she crossed the driveway was unreadable. "He's inside," Inez said before Layla could speak. "He's okay. He's been asking for you for the last hour." Layla looked at her. "Spencer told the staff not to open the gate," Inez said. "Xavier has been arguing with his father since you called." She paused. "I'm opening it because that child has been crying for his mother, and I'm not willing to let that continue." Layla didn't stop to analyze what was being offered or why. She walked through the gate the moment it was wide enough. Noah was in the front sitting room with a housekeeper who had clearly run out of things to try. The moment he saw Layla, he was across the room, his arms locked around her waist, and she held him there, both arms tight around his back. Her chin resting on top of his head, and didn't move. "Mom's here," she said. "It's okay, I've got you." Spencer stood in the doorway to the hall. He didn't speak. Odette stood behind him, one hand on his arm, watching Noah with an expression that might have been love, or might have been something more complicated. Some version of possession dressed up as devotion. Xavier came down the stairs and stopped when he saw Layla. The argument had left marks on his face. He looked like a man who had spent the last hour learning something about himself he didn't like. "We're leaving," Layla said. She didn't raise her voice. Spencer stepped forward. "He's a Fairbridge. He belongs." "Spencer." Inez's voice came from behind Layla, quiet and absolute. "Enough." The room went still. In the days that followed, Xavier called. She didn't answer most of them, and the ones she did answer were short and factual. Noah was fine. He was sleeping better. No, she wasn't ready to discuss a schedule yet. She wasn't cutting Xavier out. She was giving Noah time to stop flinching whenever they walked past a property with a tall iron fence, which had become a thing he now did. Inez called once. About a week later, Layla almost didn't pick up. "I want you to know," Inez said without preamble, "that I found documents in Spencer's study from 3 years ago when Xavier first started looking for you. Spencer had already had someone draft a custody strategy. Xavier never knew. I found them last year and I said nothing." A pause. "I'm saying something now." Layla was quiet for a moment. "Why are you telling me?" "Because I was going to use it," Inez said flatly. "I was going to use Noah to keep Xavier from leaving me. That's who I was 8 months ago." Another pause. "I'd like to think I'm different now. I can't promise that. I can only tell you what I'm doing right now." "What are you doing right now?" "Packing," Inez said. "Xavier and I are filing next month. He doesn't love me. I knew that when I married him. I told myself it would be enough." A short, dry sound. "It wasn't." The formal co-parenting agreement took 2 months. Xavier arrived at every session alone. No Fairbridge attorneys, no Spencer, no one from his family's infrastructure of management and control. He looked tired in the way of someone who had made several large decisions in succession, and was still standing upright, which was its own kind of evidence. He agreed to every condition that put Noah's existing life first: no visits to the Fairbridge estate without Layla present, and Noah's explicit consent. Neutral pickups and drop-offs until Noah indicated otherwise. No unsupervised contact between Noah and Spencer or Odette. Spencer fought this. Xavier told him no. On the day the agreement was finalized, Xavier waited outside while Layla spoke with her attorney. When she came out, he was sitting on the low wall near the building's entrance, looking at the street. "I should have told my father no 6 years ago," he said, when she stopped in front of him. She didn't say anything. "I'm not asking you to forgive it," he said. "I'm just telling you that I understand now what it cost." She looked at him for a moment. He wasn't asking to be absolved. He was stating a fact, the way someone does when they've finally stopped trying to manage their way out of the truth and started simply living inside it. "He asked about you," she said. "Last week. Noah asked if you and I used to be friends." Xavier looked up. "What did you tell him?" "I said yes." He nodded slowly. He said, "Is she still your friend?" She paused. "I told him we were still figuring it out." Something in Xavier's face settled then. Not relief exactly, but something adjacent to it. Something that looked like the beginning of being willing to do the actual work. 3 weeks later, on a Saturday morning, Xavier came to pick Noah up for a trip to the aquarium. Noah was waiting at the door before the bell finished ringing, backpack on, holding a library book about deep-sea fish he'd been saving for the occasion. "We're going to see the sharks," Noah announced. "I know," Xavier said. "You've mentioned it." "5 times, Layla said from the kitchen. Noah grinned, the sideways grin that pulled higher on the left, the one that had first stopped Xavier cold in that clinic lobby, and for a moment he looked so completely like his father that Layla had to turn back to her coffee. "I'll have him home by 5, Xavier said from the doorway. "I know," she said. She meant it this time. Noah was already halfway to the elevator. Xavier watched him go, and the look on his face was the kind that doesn't have a clean name in any language. Some mixture of grief for the years already gone, and something fierce and steady about the ones still ahead. He turned back to Layla, and she expected something final, something weighty. Instead, he said, "He told me last week that I tie my shoes wrong." She blinked. "How did he say you tie them wrong?" "He said I make the loops too big." Xavier looked down at his shoes, which had perfectly normal loops. He demonstrated the correct method. Twice. Layla pressed her lips together. "Dad!" Noah called from down the hall. The word came out easy and natural, the way it does when a child has stopped treating something as a decision and started treating it as just a fact about the world. Xavier looked at her once more. Then he turned and walked toward his son. She stood in the doorway until the elevator closed. Then she went back inside, poured her coffee, and sat at the kitchen table in the quiet morning, and thought about how long it takes to stop being afraid of something. Not all at once, not with a single moment that fixes everything. Just slowly, one kept promise at a time, one ordinary morning at a time, until the fear becomes something smaller than the life you've built around it.